The Cardinals made some roster moves ahead of the Rule 5 deadline, but did they protect all the right players? Coming up on B. Schaeffer Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of B. Schaeffer Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you in the morning hours of Wednesday, November 15th, 2023. Back with another morning recording of the podcast as we have some Cardinals roster news to discuss. The Rule 5 protection deadline was Tuesday evening, and the Cardinals made some announcements ahead of that deadline, adding 3 players to the 40-man roster, 3 guys who would have otherwise been exposed to the Rule 5 draft pool. Now they won't be, and so we'll talk about who those names are, who had to obviously leave the roster in the corresponding moves, and whether any mistakes were made there by the Cardinals. I really don't think off the cuff we have any issues with that. However, looking at the 40-man roster, which is again full after Tuesday's flurry of activity, are there more things the Cardinals could have and maybe should have done? One player in particular that I'm looking at wondering, is this guy going to be drafted in the Rule 5, and are the Cardinals going to regret not protecting him? We'll talk about that today on the show. Thank you guys for listening with me. As always, we're going to try to just get right into it a little quicker with the content. So a quick reminder, if you enjoy Cardinals content on a daily basis, and that's not just during the season, that's off season. We've been doing a great job lately with daily episodes pretty much every day, but Sunday morning over the last 9-10 days. Make sure you hit subscribe on this YouTube channel. Free to do so, youtube.com/@bschaeffer12, the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals writer channel. Appreciate you guys for being with me here. And if you want to listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can do that as well. Podcast is called B. Schaeffer Daily, and you can subscribe on those avenues. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Here are the roster moves from the Cardinals. I'll read it straight off of the tweet that they put on Twitter. Cardinals have selected the contracts of Adam Kloffenstein, which is Steen, Pedro Pages, and Sam Robberse. And to do so, they have outrighted Packy Naughton to Memphis, Connor Thomas designated for assignment, and Wilking Rodriguez, which I think we knew as of yesterday's podcast recording, has been outrighted. He has elected free agency. So Wilking Rodriguez, the guy who was the Rule 5 pick last year from the Yankees, spent the entire season injured, 33 years old. Cardinals decide to outright him off the 40-man roster. As a result, Wilking says, thanks but no thanks, I'm going to go be a free agent. We knew that yesterday. Connor Thomas, designated for assignment, which means his status still up in the air somewhat, unless I've missed the news note on him, whether he remains in the organization with the Cardinals in the minor leagues, just not as a member of the 40-man roster, or whether he is just released. He could theoretically be traded after being designated for assignment. We'll have to wait and see, but he's off the 40-man roster, the 25-year-old left-handed pitcher who people were pretty excited about, honestly, about a year ago at this time. He was a pitcher out in the Arizona Fall League, which is often a place where a lot of the up-and-coming prospects get a chance to show their skills. And Connor Thomas was looking pretty sharp out there with a 1.75 ERA in 25 innings and 35 strikeouts. So he had a really good fall league, was working on some new pitches, some new pitch shapes that people thought maybe would help him out. It just did not materialize for Connor Thomas in 2023. Finished with a 5.53 ERA in 94 innings at Memphis and just 69 strikeouts. So we continue to harp on the K rate for a lot of these guys because, as we talked about yesterday, we kind of stumbled upon something really interesting in yesterday's podcast. And the comments told me that, hey, this was a really interesting way to frame it as well, Brenden. A lot of people appreciated it. And it wasn't anything that I think I intended to do coming into the podcast. But as I was talking and researching sort of the players that we were talking about yesterday, we stumbled upon something really interesting as it pertains to maybe like boiling down all of the Cardinals' failure in 2023 to just a couple of areas, which of course you can't do. There was a lot of factors that played into it, but I found a couple of specific ones that I think played into one another and caused a lot of the issues. When you look at the K rates for a lot of the starting pitchers, you can look at Adam Wainwright's 100 innings, Dakota Hudson's 81 innings, and Miles Michaelis' 200 innings. It's about 380 innings from those three guys that made up a really big chunk of the Cardinals season. And those guys were near the very bottom of MLB in strikeout rate, with Wainwright being last, 172nd of 172 in strikeout rate among pitchers who threw at least 80 innings. Dakota Hudson was second to last, 171st out of 172. And Miles Michaelis, I think, was like 160th. If you look at all qualifying starters, Miles Michaelis was second from the bottom, but qualifying is quite a few more innings. So we bumped that down, but we just looked and said, wow, those three guys not striking anybody out. Combine that with a year where the Cardinals' infield defense really took a dive. Okay, let's talk about why it took a dive a little bit. Obviously, some regression from Arenado, especially in the first half. I think we saw some regression from Paul Goldschmidt. We'll see if he's able to bounce back defensively. But you look at his full season numbers, the metrics did not love Goldie at first. And then in the middle infield, you just had so much shuffling. And the Cardinals talked a lot about the benefit of their depth and their flexibility of their players. But I wondered how much the shuffling ends up kind of hurting the Cardinals, where you have DeYoung playing shortstop at the beginning of the year. You have Tommy playing shortstop before DeYoung's there. You have, Mason Wynn obviously coming in at the end, but second base was a revolving door with guys like Edman being thrust into the spot after playing a lot of shortstop, and he did not acclimate well. A former Gold Glover at second, but he didn't play very well at second base, especially early in the season when he was asked to do so after DeYoung's arrival. Brendan Donovan, a former Gold Glover as a utility man, but played some second base, and then you have Nolan Gorman playing second base. It's a different double play combo almost every day, it seemed. And obviously then you throw Tommy Edman in the outfield, where he played really well defensively. But just thinking about the infield defense combined with the lack of K rate from such a significant portion of the rotation, you can kind of boil it down and say that was the Cardinals' season in a nutshell of why they struggle so much and the ERAs balloon for a lot of the pitchers. The Wainwright thing, and again, if you start to think about ways that it could get better and do so quickly, and I want to expand upon this in another podcast because we are going to dive more into the roster moves today. But as I look at Connor Thomas's numbers and look at the low K rate and think about, okay, why did the Cardinals give up on this 25-year-old pitcher? Everybody's ERAs at Memphis are bad. It's a hitter-friendly league. Well, I think you can look at the K rate and say, man, Connor Thomas, this was a year where he had a lot of momentum coming into the year and didn't end up coming through on any of that. And in particular, with the strikeout rate, it just wasn't even close to anything that you could project to be quality at the big league level in terms of a K rate. And why does that matter, and why are the Cardinals so focused on that? I think you can look at last year, look at the decline we just described defensively and the lack of strikeouts from the rotation in general, and you say, well, something's got to give. And I think it would be better for the Cardinals to try and improve in both areas, right? And they're obviously targeting strikeout pitchers in free agency to fix that aspect of it. I, yesterday on the podcast, talked a little bit about it, and I recommend going back and listening to the whole conversation if you missed it. I think there's some element to maybe needing a little bit more of a stable defense on the infield and adjusting your roster in ways that could provide that, which is how we led ourselves to wondering, would they trade Nolan Gorman for a pitcher if he is the big kind of marquee piece that can get them a controllable starter? And would that be okay? Because not that he's a bad defender on the infielder at second base, but he's an average one. And if the Cardinals aren't going to totally be able to overcome their deficit with strikeout rate, like you signed Sonny Gray, he's a K per inning. He's not Blake Snell striking out, 11 guys per 9 or 12 guys per 9. He's not Tyler Glass now. So it does sort of depend, I think, on who they get in terms of fixing the rotation as to how important is that infield defense going to be at second base and the other positions. And honestly, something I don't even think I mentioned yesterday when having this conversation, you expand that out, and it's really interesting to think about the rule changes being a part of the issues, because all of these things were changing at once for the Cardinals. So it's hard to diagnose specifically which thing happened that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I think it was a combination of things, but it's so interesting how directly these things in particular seemed to overlap. The strikeout rate, so you're putting more balls in play with a defense that's not as equipped to turn those balls in plays into outs, combined with like you're handicapping your defense because they can't shift anymore. That's not a thing they're allowed to do. And the Cardinals were one of the best, most effective teams in baseball at shifting the year before that. And you throw in the pitch count, not the pitch count, the pitch clock. Always has been a pitch count. The pitch clock, which is going to be another factor in maybe limiting the effectiveness of pitchers, or at least be a reason and an explanation as to why some of the strikeout rates were even lower than we usually see from guys in their career norms. Like all of those things, I think, directly coexist and combine to really hurt the Cardinals on that side of the ball. And then on the other side of the ball, I think it was just the offense doing kind of what we have seen it do in past years, where it's got robust talent, it's got the ability to score runs in bulk, but it's not got that consistency. right? That was the complaint always with the Jeff Albert offense, is that, well, they can score a bunch of runs and they can be top 10, top 5 in runs scored, but the consistency day-to-day isn't there. And maybe everybody was hoping, hey, Turner Ward, new hitting coach, new situation. I think what did we learn? It's not just the hitting coach. The players have to adapt as well, because you can keep scapegoating the hitting coach every year and getting a new guy every year, but in reality, the players have talent. They have to find consistent plate approaches from day to day to be able to avoid those stretches where you score 8 runs, you score 11 runs, but then the next day you get shut out or you score 1 and you lose a well-pitched game 3-1. Like, if I were to do like a 5-minute stump speech on why the Cardinals lost 91 games last year, that would be the speech. And I can talk more about how, you know, by the time it was clear they weren't going to win, it didn't make sense to take Waino out of the rotation because they were already going to lose 85, 87 games. So what's a couple more losses for the chance that he, a Cardinal legend, could get to 200 wins? And that's the way they handled it, and it's appropriate. And, hey, they might even get a better draft pick as a result of it. But that's part of it, too. In other circumstances, you don't take a pitcher that's got Adam Wainwright's stats and allow him to pitch for a full season. He's cut by June, right, on most teams, but he's a Cardinal legend, and they were basically out of it for the entire season. And so they were a little bit more willing to write it out with Adam Wainwright, which, from a competitive standpoint, if you're mad about that as a Cardinals fan, that's okay, and you're not wrong. But what I would submit is if they make that move and they win 5 extra games, what do you gain as a Cardinals fan from them going 76 and 86 versus 71 and 91? Not really anything, other than, you know, you don't get the satisfaction of seeing Waino win number 200. So I really think that's another feather in the cap of why, if the Cardinals make the appropriate moves this offseason, they're going to be able to turn things around more quickly than just you would look at the record and expect. You could say, well, it's a 71-win team. How are they going to get the extra 20 wins to be in a playoff position at 90, 91 wins? Well, really, they would have probably been 74, 75 if not for just letting it right out with Adam Wainwright the entire year, because he was the worst pitcher in baseball and it wasn't really close. But he was injured as well. And under normal circumstances, you put that guy on the IL and you say, well, better luck next year, because we know that you're a good quality pitcher over your career. But, you know, this year you're injured. You've got to rehab that injury. And that's not what they chose to do, because the season was kind of tanked anyway. And it was his last year and everybody knew it. So you get to have that going out moment where he pitches a great scoreless game and gets win number 200 and everybody's happy. But when you think about, is it possible to turn it around quickly? Yes, if they make the right moves. Strikeout rate is important in that, but really just replacing Wainwright's production with a league average arm, I think, is going to go a long way toward helping the Cardinals to a higher win total. And again, if he was your number 5 and was the worst number 5 in the league last year, and the Cardinals are able to sign a quality number 2, like, let's say they don't come up with a true ace, like Sonny Gray, is he an ace? I don't know. He's a really good number 2. And then they make a trade for a guy who's, if he's not an ace, he's a really good number 2. And then you feel like, okay, Michaelis can be a solid number 3 caliber pitcher. Maybe Steven Matz can settle in as a number 4, but his health is kind of a concern as well, which is why Mozeliak has talked about the swing man and maybe getting an additional pitcher. But he said 3 pitchers and then said 2.5. So that's going to be a podcast coming up later this week when we don't have news to break down like we do today with the Rule 5 protection deadline. I still want to talk about that 2.5 pitchers comment a little bit more. But my point with this is, if then your last pitcher that you sign or you trade for is your number 5 and is replacing Adam Wainwright, all he's got to do is just be, 4.4 ERA in 165 innings. And if you get that from your number 5, that's a world of difference compared to what Adam Wainwright did, which, again, I don't think Cardinals fans are saying, yeah, go out and sign a guy that you expect to have a 4.4 ERA. But, I mean, reality suggests that could actually still be helpful, which if that's your half starter at the end of a 2.5, and the first 2 guys are at least like the quality of a number 2 or better, you got a fighting chance. But I think there are other things that you'd have to tweak with your roster at that point, because the rotation's not, certainly the rotation didn't carry the Cardinals last year. It's not going to carry the Cardinals without some major adjustments this offseason, and some kind of middle-of-the-road adjustments won't get it done. But that was all kind of a talking point, or a series of talking points off of the decision to DFA Connor Thomas. So, again, you just look at the numbers. You had hope for him, but it just didn't really pan out, and, didn't even get a major league opportunity last year because they weren't seeing even remotely enough at AAA to feel compelled to do that. So he's off the 40-man. Packy Naughton off the 40-man as well. Recovering from surgery. I believe it wasn't like the full-blown Tommy John, but sort of the Seth Maness version where the repair surgery that is supposed to theoretically get you back quicker. It's not as invasive. We'll see what ends up becoming of Packy Naughton. As of now, it seems he's still in the organization because the Cardinals announced it. They say, well, he's been outrighted to Memphis. But with Wilking Rodriguez, they said he's been outrighted and has elected free agency. So as far as we know now, Packy's still with the club, but not on the 40-man. He'll be at spring training, with a minor league invite, we presume. And then if at the end of February, end of March, I should say, there's an opportunity and they want to add him to that bullpen again, theoretically they should be able to do so unless he decides to go the free agency route. But I would imagine there was a conversation with Packy that was like, look, we think with your injury we can pass you through waivers, and if that occurs, then we can send you to the minors, we can keep you around, and if you show, what you showed previously before the injury at spring training, you'll have a shot to make this bullpen. That would be my guess as to the conversation that took place with Packy, because a lot of times with injured players, you do try to slide them through waivers, and he's still, I would have to think, on the tail end of that recovery process. Got hurt at the beginning of last year, had a few appearances for the Cardinals. They were scoreless, but then had the injury and spent all season injured. And you think about these valuable 40-man spots and how the Cardinals are looking to use them without certainty surrounding his situation. I think they said, hey, we think we can pass him through waivers, and if we do, we'd like to keep him in the organization. But beyond that, it's just the move that needs to be made so we can accommodate these other moves. And like I said, that's something that's not all too uncommon. You might remember, I think it was about a year ago, Cardinals had a minor league reliever, Freddie Pacheco, who they did not keep on the 40-man roster. And some Cardinals fans were upset about that because they felt like he had a lot of upside, but he was rehabbing an injury and ultimately, I think, needed Tommy John. And so when the Tigers picked him up, he had Tommy John, and now the Tigers yesterday released him. So the world spins round. In this case, for Packy Naughton, I think it's nice that he was able to stay in the organization, but don't be shocked if we see, he's elected free agency. Like, I guess without any news update on that, it's still a possibility. But another lefty for the Cardinals bullpen mix if he remains on the organization, just not on the 40-man roster. But those are the three guys that were taken off the roster. Let's talk about the guys that were put on before we get into whether that was enough, whether they protected all the right players. We talked on yesterday's podcast that we expected or would have hoped to see Adam Kloffenstein and Sem Robberse protected by the Cardinals because those were both pitchers, right-handers that came over in the Jordan Hicks trade. And it's not that we're saying these guys, either of them, are going to be future big league studs. We don't know if either of them will make it. But when you make a trade on August 1st or the weekend before August 1st, as the Cardinals did with the Blue Jays, and then you're talking in November like, well, these guys could be picked up by other teams for $100,000. That's not really something that I think would be very good optics at the least. Kloffenstein had some decent numbers at AAA. Sem Robberse got hit around a little bit, but for both guys, it was their first glimpse of AAA when they got to the Cardinals and they went to Memphis. They had both only pitched in AA, and so it was a new thing for both of them. And I just think to make a decision after a trade on just a couple of months of action at the highest level they've ever pitched would probably not be prudent. So I think it makes sense to protect them both. There was some scuttlebutt that people didn't really necessarily think they were going to protect them. They thought maybe Kloffenstein, but not Robberse. I was pretty convinced, and you never know, like, if you say something and then you see somebody else in the industry go, I don't really know if they're going to bother. Sometimes you kind of second guess yourself. But I had said Kloffenstein. I'm going to do it. Kloffenstein. If I just say it that way, I'll never get it wrong. Adam Kloffenstein, I thought, got to protect him. Robberse got to protect him just to get a glimpse, get those guys to spring training and see. And the other aspect of why is I thought there were so many guys on the 40-man roster that you could cut and really not lose any sleep over it. Right? The names that were cut, we talked about all of them yesterday, at least briefly, with Packy Naughton and Connor Thomas. And Wilking Rodriguez we had discussed as well because that news was already reported as of yesterday's recording. There are more guys on this 40-man roster that don't need to be, just being completely blunt. Now, we know that a number of them are going to fall off the 40-man roster before spring training because the Cardinals said they're signing 2.5 pitchers or adding 2.5 pitchers in some capacity, and so far they have added 0. So in order to add somebody in free agency, somebody's got to fall off the roster. and there are some very obvious candidates to do it. I'd be surprised if James Nail is on the 40-man going into spring training. Again, we like James Nail, but they've cut him from the 40-man multiple times, and he's never been claimed on waivers. And he's in his early 30s at this point. I think he's going to continue to be an organizational depth piece for the Cardinals. It's going to be what it is. If he remains with the team, it's going to be kind of the same deal as it was in previous years. But they leave him on the 40-man for now, and we'll have to wait and see. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, let me double check on this. Won't take me long. Could I have paused the podcast to look this up? Yeah, but I didn't. I believe there was a point in time where he was taken off the 40-man on his birthday, if that sounds right. But his birthday's February of 93. So maybe I'm misremembering that. Because February 8th, well, no, maybe I'm not. That's right before spring training. So that is what happened. I don't. Maybe they don't wait as long this year, or maybe it helps them with service time or something to do it that way. I have no idea. I have no idea what the reasoning for that was, but that was right before spring training, because we got to spring training and it was like, yeah, happy birthday, James. Like James Nail is still at spring training, just wasn't a part of the 40-man. I feel like he's probably not a part of the 40-man beginning spring training this year, just based on how many players we know the Cardinals need to add. Michael Ciani is another guy who, if you really were paying close attention at the end of last season, you remember Michael Ciani because he got a little bit of run with the big league Cardinals. He's not that old. He's just 24 years old. However, he isn't really a prospect offensively. He was with the Reds. He got a little bit of run with the Reds, hit 167 in 2022. Cardinals grab him in the middle of 2023 after he starts with the Reds. Had a 697 minor league OPS with the Reds. Comes to the Cardinals, has a 675 minor league OPS with the Cardinals. They put him up for depth at the end of the season. Did not record a hit in 5 plate appearances for the Cardinals. He's not that old, right? Just 23 years old, turns 24. Just turned 24 this summer. He does not need to be on the 40-man roster. So I don't think he'll continue to be after the Cardinals sign people. Again, I'm not trying to rip the guy, but just like in terms of if you had guys you really wanted to protect from the Rule 5 draft, I think there would have been opportunities to do so, which is why when I talk about one specific name, I don't know if he'll get selected in the Rule 5. Maybe this ends up being a big waste of time even talking about him, but we did mention him yesterday. He didn't get protected, and I don't know. Maybe he would get selected, and we'll talk about why that is and why I kind of would have made one more 40-man move yesterday, but we'll see. There is another addition, though, to talk about before we get into that. Pedro Pages is the catcher that we thought wouldn't probably be added because he would make the 4th catcher on the 40-man roster, and you really don't need that. But the Cardinals added Pages because they like his talent. They think he has some ability, and enough so that he might have been taken in the Rule 5 draft. And we know in the Cardinals organization, there are some questions right now at catcher, because there are some decisions that could be pending, and I think at this point they could go a number of different directions with how they move forward with this position. We know Wilson Contreras is going to be there, signed for 4 more years beyond the year that just happened on the 5-year deal. So he's going to be your primary catcher, but a step forward taken by Andrew Kisner offensively last year, a step forward taken in all elements of the game, I think, from Ivan Herrera, where he just didn't look ready in 2022. You remember there was a time where the Cardinals had a needed catcher because Yachty was injured, and they call up Ivan Herrera, and a couple weeks later they send him back down, and you think, oh, they must be calling up the big next catching prospect, right? No, they called up Austin Romine just to be a body because of how convinced they were that Ivan Herrera was not ready for the opportunity. They just didn't think he looked good, didn't think he handled the situation well in terms of pitch calling, pitch handling. Offensively, he was a 0 at the time, just didn't really bring anything in that regard. I think he had a great offseason, and I think he came into 2023 ready to play. He really took that next step that let everybody remember why Ivan Herrera was ranked by many as one of the Cardinals' top prospects. He had a really good season to where I don't really have a lot of question at this point that Ivan Herrera is ready for a big league role on a full-time basis. You know, not necessarily an everyday starter, but he doesn't need to be one of those guys bouncing back and forth between AAA and MLB anymore. I think he's ready for the big leagues, and he showed that with his performance that he, didn't get a ton of opportunities in 2023, but when he was up, he looked like he was a big leaguer. He looked the part. I think that's the best way I could put it. Maybe didn't look the part as much in the opportunities that he had the year before, but in the brief chances that he got in St. Louis this past summer, I thought he looked the part. 297 average, 409 OBP, 351 slug, so not a big power guy, but a 761 OPS in 37 at-bats, 44 plate appearances with the Cardinals. So we got to recognize that's a small sample. But again, he took a step forward offensively in Memphis as well. Back in 2022, he had a 770 OPS, which if that's your big league OPS, you're like, that's a pretty solid above average hitter that we'll put in the lineup. But if you're doing that at Memphis, you go, okay, what does your big league productivity project? Remember, Mason Wynn had great numbers at AAA, much better than a 770 OPS. When he got to St. Louis, there was a learning curve, and I think we saw that a little bit with him offensively. It was a similar story for the little bit of chance that Ivan Herrera got in 2022 with the Cardinals. Just 2022 plate appearances, he hit 111. He had just a couple of hits. He goes 2 for 22 with a 111 average and a 191 on base with no extra base hits. So that was kind of the learning curve. Last year, though, comes out, has a 951 OPS at Memphis, a 450 on base percentage with a 500 slug, hits 10 home runs. Like, he's not a power hitter, but 10 home runs and 375 plate appearances. Ivan Herrera had a great offensive season at Memphis, and because of that, I think some of that finally translated, and he did a nice little job when he was with the Cardinals offensively. And I think you just found a lot more trust in the way that he went about his business as a catcher, which is not to say he was like lazy or doing anything wrong the year before. I just think that moment hadn't come for him where he goes and locks in on how to be a big leaguer and be an effective big leaguer. I think Ivan Herrera has turned that corner, which for the Cardinals, you go, well, man, if we had seen that coming, he could catch half the games and Kisner could catch half the games, and maybe we don't spend $87 million on a catcher. We can devote that, those resources in other areas, which is not the same as saying the Cardinals regret Wilson Contreras and they wish he wasn't on the team and all these things. That's not what that means. But just from if you're playing this out on a franchise mode video game, you can look at that and say, man, if you take the personalities out of it, just from a effective use of resources standpoint, they maybe didn't have to desperately go after and pay the highest market value for a catcher if Ivan Herrera is turning into what the Cardinals and I think everybody watching him now thinks he can be. The past is the past and Wilson is here. So what do you do at that point? How do you proceed knowing the situation that you're in where Andrew Kisner hit 10 home runs last year, had a career-high OPS? The pitchers obviously really respected the job he did in game calling and the work he did behind the plate. He's a great clubhouse guy. He's affordable. He's only going to make a couple of million in arbitration, we would expect this year. So to me, not a guy to non-tender. I know some Cardinals fans looked at the move yesterday and said, well, Pages is being added to the roster. Does that mean Kiz is about to be non-tendered? I can't say for sure that he's not, but that would surprise me. I don't think that is a effective use of resources just because you say, well, we think Ivan Herrera is a good player, so we want him to be the backup now, and he's a little cheaper. Okay, but you're at that point, you're wasting an asset in Andrew Kisner, who I don't know that he's got a ton of trade value, but I certainly think he's got value to the Cardinals. So does that cause St. Louis to pivot and potentially trade Ivan Herrera for something they need this offseason? I think there is a possibility of that. And there's also a possibility that they move on from Kisner in some capacity. Again, I don't think it's a non-tender, but if it is, then it is, and I'm wrong, and we'll talk about it in 2 days because that deadline's Friday. The other possibility is if you trade Kisner, if a team would be interested in him. But I think the easier guy to trade and the guy with more trade value would be Ivan Herrera because of his age, a little bit younger, a little bit more team control, obviously, because Kisner's already into arbitration, and Ivan Herrera hasn't really had any MLB service time. Picked up a little bit this year, but I still think is going to be not a free agent until 2029 or something like that. So you've got basically his entire career ahead of him in terms of team control, but that could be more attractive to other teams if you're trying to make a trade to move your 40-man roster back down to 3 catchers. Why you protect Pedro Pages? Well, he also took a step forward in 2023, just at Double-A after a trip to the Arizona Fall League in 2022. After that season, went to the Fall League, did a nice job. He had fine offensive numbers in Springfield as well in 2022 with a 754 OPS. 6 home runs as kind of a part-time player. He spent a decent amount of the season in Double-A and then actually got promoted to Triple-A later on in 2022. Had just a 635 OPS there, so not, again, that's a hard jump to make and maintain your production offensively. So the numbers go down a little bit. And then in 2023, even after going to the Fall League, he's back in Double-A because the Cardinals basically had Ivan Herrera stationed at Memphis, and they also had Trace Barrera. So the catcher depth, he kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit, Pages did, and was at Double-A for that reason for the entire year. Played a good amount, had an 806 OPS, so we saw a little bit of growth from him in his age 24 season. And now just recently turning 25 in September, Cardinals like his defense as well. I saw, I think it was maybe Derek Gould that put on Twitter, one of the first guys, and if it wasn't Derek and was somebody else, I apologize, but was one of the guys the Cardinals had testing out the pitch comms when that was first a thing. One of the catchers that they entrusted to kind of work through that process with pitchers. He's respected in the organization for what he does defensively and behind the plate. And then you can see the signs of growth offensively this past season, albeit at a lower level. The Cardinals basically said, yeah, we've seen enough from this guy that an organization could decide to pick him up in the Rule 5 draft and have him be their backup catcher all season long. And, you know, because if you do grab a guy in the Rule 5, you have to keep him on the Major League roster all year. But the Cardinals said we don't want that to happen with Pages, so we're gonna add him to the roster because we think we've got a spot to do so. And that doesn't necessarily signal the immediate move for another catcher, but I would say that it opens the door even further that if the Cardinals do find a move that they can make with Ivan Herrera, or there is a team maybe interested in Kisner, I don't think it's impossible that they do either of those things. I do tend to lean toward the Herrera move just because you might be able to use Herrera in a trade that gets you a starting pitcher. I'm not saying it would be a 1-for-1, but we know that the Cardinals absolutely have needs that they've got to fill here. And if you can use Herrera for one of those types of trades, I think that you do that if he's rebuilt enough of that trade value as a, you know, kind of a former top prospect. Whatever they think of him right now as a prospect, you can see the numbers and you can see the production. I think that's going to open some eyes in trade talks. It's not the type of trade where, like, if I talk about a Tyler O'Neill right now, and we haven't mentioned his name in terms of non-tenders, it's possible that they would non-tender him on Friday because he's going to make like $5 million. And I don't think he has a role on this team in 2024, but I could be wrong about that. If they can't find a trade for him, they may say one more year, we're not willing to just give up on the possibility that he figures it out, and we're going to bring him back and try one more time with that. We'll see what happens there. But when I talk about Tyler O'Neill, you might make a trade just for a guy who's maybe a prospect that's not even on the 40-man yet, just to clear that 40-man spot, just to clear up the glut in the outfield a little bit. And then you add a piece of talent to the organization that is a little younger and you can wait on to decide, you know, what their role is going to be and what their future is going to be. That's not the type of trade I think you'd see with Ivan Herrera. I think they only trade Herrera if they feel he can be utilized via trade to fill an immediate need on the roster for this season. So interesting to add Pages there. I think it's partially they didn't want to lose him, didn't want to risk that because they think he's got talent in the future. Partially, they do have some decisions upcoming to make a catcher, and if they are able to make one of those decisions and they're able to move a catcher in terms of a deal that nets them something that they need elsewhere, then I think they're going to be willing to do that. So it's not cut and dry, in my opinion. It doesn't signal this is definitely Kisner getting non-tendered. It doesn't signal this is definitely Herrera getting traded, but it does kind of open your eyes to say keep them peeled and see what could potentially come down the pike on that. I think it's possible that you do see some movement because you really don't need 4 catchers on the 40-man. You can have it that way, but you don't need it that way. So that could be a signal that the Cardinals are looking to do something, and we'll have to just watch the rest of the offseason to see what happens there. But good for Pedro. I'm glad he gets the opportunity. He's a good dude, as I talked about yesterday. I just didn't think because he was exposed to the Rule 5 the year before and not taken, I didn't necessarily think that it would be different this year with him only playing at Double-A and not Triple-A after playing Triple-A previously. But he had nice numbers and I think has a good reputation, so that's why the Cardinals make that move. Speaking of nice numbers, though, I want to get into the player that I thought the Cardinals maybe should have protected yesterday but didn't do so. And I'm not saying the sky is falling as a result of not protecting this player, but as I talked about a couple of days ago when we were looking ahead to this possibility, Ian Bedell, the 4th-round pick of the Cardinals out of the University of Missouri, M-I-Z, in the 2020 draft, which was a draft that only had 5 rounds because of COVID, Cardinals use a draft pick on that player in a very truncated draft, pick him in the 4th round, and he has Tommy John surgery shortly thereafter. He pitched in Peoria in 2021, but hardly played, quickly got injured, missed all of 2022 for the most part, came back a little bit at the end, just got a couple of innings in between rookie ball and A ball. But then 2023 finally gets an opportunity to have a full season in Peoria. The Cardinals don't end up advancing him beyond high A ball, but he pitches all year there for the most part and had some nice numbers. Primarily used as a starter, 19 starts in 27 total games. So some of those games wasn't a starter, but they're just working him back. I think he could have a future as a starter. But a 2.44 earned run average in 96 innings with 106 strikeouts. So you're seeing the strikeout rate above 1 per inning pitched, which is what you want to see. Now, granted, this is a player in his age 23 season because he was a multi-year collegiate guy who then had Tommy John surgery. So he, on the age curve, he's behind, right? He's not one of those guys that you say, hey, he's pitching at a level younger than his age group. He's pitching younger than the guys he's facing. That's not the case with Ian Bedell because of the circumstances surrounding his career. But all you can do is say he pitched at the level he pitched last year. He finally had a chance to pitch professionally without injury and had a really good season. Now, the Cardinals did not bring him up to Double-A, even though I would say generally after you start seeing those numbers the way they looked in High A for a 23-year-old, you promote that guy rather quickly. He's now 24, turned 24 in September. A little bit of a surprise to me to not see them make that move, but that was basically toward the end of the season that he turned 24, and I guess they felt their Double-A rotation was where it needed to be. Clearly, Ian Bedell would be a guy that would start 2024, he would begin in Double-A, at least. He wouldn't, that would be where he'd start next year. But will he still be in the Cardinals organization, or will he be starting the season at the big league level because somebody picks him up in the Rule 5 draft? And I know you're saying, well, goodness gracious, he's only pitched at High A. There's still Double-A that he's never seen, and Triple-A that he's never seen. But when we talked about this the other day, I brought up the name Luis Perdomo from 7, 8, 9 years ago, where the Cardinals had him in a similar situation. And I think he was even a little bit younger, so you would have figured a little less likely that a team would take a plunge and pick him up in the Rule 5 and force him onto their active roster all year, because I think Perdomo was about 21 years old. Bedell now has turned 24. And a guy who's pitched in college for 3 years and now has a professional year under his belt, it's very possible, I think, that a team looks at him and puts him in their bullpen. And if that happens, it's a major whiff for the Cardinals, unless they've already decided that they just don't believe in him, which if they've decided that, they're wrong. Like, we don't know what the future is going to be for Ian Bedell, but I think the Cardinals have a very haughty attitude sometimes when it comes to certain players that they just internally think, oh, this guy doesn't really have a future, even though he's got great numbers at AAA. We know who Randy Arozarena is. Don't worry. Oh, we know who Adolis Garcia is. Don't you guys worry. Like, we know who these guys are. We don't need to see him at the big league level to know that. I think they got a little too big for their britches on some of those things. That's an element of this that doesn't get talked about as much. It gets talked about as like, oh, the Cardinals just missed in talent evaluation and they didn't realize the potential this player had. But I think it comes from a place of like, not just ignorance of, oh, we just didn't know, we didn't realize he could do that. It's like the data might be right in front of you. Good minor league numbers. What else is a guy supposed to do but have good minor league numbers if he's in the minor leagues? And we just think we know better, so we're going to go a different route with the players that we prioritize instead. I don't know that that's happening with Ian Bedell, but if he should get selected in the Rule 5 draft, whatever explanation would be given by the Cardinals, I don't think would be good enough, because the career of the player still has to play out. And he could go and pitch badly in the major leagues next year, and then you could say, see, we didn't need him. But that's not the way you make decisions. You don't make decisions after the fact with all the information and knowing how it plays out. You've got to make the best decision to add expected value. Make a plus EV decision is what they'd say in like the fantasy football or the sports gambling world. You've got to have a plus EV decision. And to me, it is a minus expected value decision to potentially lose Ian Bedell. Even if they don't lose him, the decision, I think, is a bad one, because in this moment, there are multiple players on the 40-man roster that don't need to be there, that if you were to outright them or to pass them through waivers, they aren't getting claimed. Even if those players are getting claimed, and I'm wrong about that, you know more about what those players are, and you're not really losing much opportunity cost with them going out the door. But in the case of Ian Bedell, there is still upside here. Again, the path that he's taken is 4th-round draft pick in a 5-round draft. So clearly, one of the 150 or so players drafted has some talent, has some worthiness to be drafted in that year. Has Tommy John almost immediately, which every pitcher does. So that's not, you can't hold that against him and say that means he's not going to make it. And then he pitches one full professional season at the level you put him at, Cardinals, and he's fantastic. That's the path that we have seen so far. There's nothing to suggest that he shouldn't be somebody that you're protecting from Rule 5, because he had that 2020 season, which didn't exist, but that was year 1. 21, 22, 23, that's 4 seasons for Ian Bedell. Because he was signed at an age of 19 or higher, it's 4 years of professional seasons before he's exposed to Rule 5. So this is the one, and I'm not saying he's going to get drafted, but if he does, it's a miss by the Cardinals, and you can anticipate that he would get drafted to such a degree that I think instead of allowing it to happen, you make the move and say, well, let's move him up to Double-A next year and see, because if he continues, he seems to have some of the strikeout rate and the stuff that we are seeking at the big league level. This guy's already here, so we don't need to go out and dumpster dive for somebody else, because we actually drafted this kid, and we could just make sure to retain him rather than have to add to our minor league depth in other ways and hope that we can find diamonds in the rough. We might already have him on our team. Again, this could be a wasted podcast because he may not be selected. But for me, with the number of players that you have on the 40-man, and again, I hate to do this because it's going to come off as bagging on guys that are on the team and in the organization, but I think if you just look at it from a strategic, non-emotional standpoint, you can look at James Nail and say a couple of times you've taken him off the roster and then added him back on, and if he's never left the organization. Michael Ciani, again, the Reds got rid of him. You picked him up. Does he need the 40-man spot when you have Newt Barr, Walker, Carlson, Burleson, Moises Gomez, Richie Palacios ahead of him on the outfield depth chart? Again, some of those guys, O'Neill might be traded or cut. Carlson could be traded. Burleson could be traded. Moises Gomez could be cut. I think I'd be a little bit more inclined to keep Moises Gomez from like that same Adolis Garcia tier, where Gomez led the minors in homers in 2022, never did get a crack at the big leagues. His numbers regressed a little bit in 2023. That doesn't make the Cardinals right about him, right? They're just keeping him in the minors for whatever reason. In another organization, Moises Gomez could have been getting 400 plate appearances in the big leagues last year and hitting 20 home runs. Like, would he have? I don't know. But that's the story of Adolis Garcia, right? Like, oh, you're good enough for our AAA, but we're not really going to be bringing you up to the big leagues. Of all the situations the Cardinals had this past year, you can't find a time to put Moises Gomez out there and just see before potentially making a decision to cut him from your 40-man this offseason, which they may do. I'm not saying they'll do it for sure, but like if there was a time to do it, it was a year where you're losing 91 games and just see if this guy with mammoth power in the minors can find a way to get another year in the big leagues. Well, we project he's going to have a really low batting average and it's just going to be some empty power. Okay, you project it, but what if it wasn't that way? You maybe have Adolis Garcia on your hands. Not defensively with Moises. He's not really a great defender. But offensively, like, that is a prime example of what gets people irritated. It chaps the khakis of Cardinals fans because they're like, you're the organization that lost to Rosarena and Adolis Garcia without knowing what those guys could become. And you have a guy who led the minors in homers in 2022, and then you lose 91 games in 2023, and you don't think to bring him up for an at-bat? Not one? It's crazy to me, man. In 2022, he had an 1,100 OPS in Double-A and an 882 OPS in Triple-A at 23 years old. Hit 39 home runs combined between those two levels in 2022. 2023 happens. He spends all year at Memphis. He hits 232, which was a lower batting average than he had the year before that. 293 on base, a 457 slug. He still ends up with 30 home runs, but yeah, kind of empty power because the OPS is down to 750. But like, could you see a world in which that just saps a guy's confidence where you go from, I just had the year of my life, surely I'm going to get a big league chance. And then they've got freaking Michael Ciani running around in the outfield out there at the end of September this year. And again, Is Siani a better defensive outfielder? Sure. At that point, what does it matter? Is Michael Siani really a part of your future, or is he a body that you had to have fill the outfield because the rest of your team was on the IL? It's crazy to me. And it's a minor quibble. Like, it doesn't have to be this big of a deal that we spend this much time talking about it, but I feel like the Cardinals have made it that way by doing it over and over and over again, prioritizing these players from other organizations. I thought they were the organization that rewarded guys for their performance in the minors. That's what they used to preach, that all the time. If you perform, you're going to get a shot. Moises Gomez has to be seeing Michael Siani in the outfield last year go, you got to be kidding me. Are my numbers the best in 2023? No. I've got a 750 OPS. I've got a really low batting average, and my on base has gone way down. But the idea that this guy could have the 2022 that he had and not earn any goodwill or credit for that, and the Cardinals might just say, oh, well, I mean, he's not a defensive outfielder. We couldn't put him in center and in the corners. We just don't think he's more of a DH. Okay, great. Give him a chance to show that then. If you're the organization that wants to pride itself on, you give guys opportunity. It makes me, you can tell in my voice, it makes me irritated on behalf of some of these guys. Because you go out and say, well, Michael Siani's got to be here. And I don't know Michael Siani. I'm not trying to rip the guy. But I think Cardinals fans can understand where I'm coming from, where it's like, if you've got guys that you have had in your organization that have been important for your club because minor league depth matters too, and they're filling spots on the minors, and they're helping maybe contribute to wins in the minors, because that's another thing that doesn't get talked about. You look at after COVID, the performance of the minor league clubs in the St. Louis organization, they've lost a lot of games. And these are the guys that are then coming up to try and not lose a lot of games at the big league level. Cardinals say it matters to win because we want the players, these young players, to know what it's like and what that feels like and what that tastes like to win. That was what Ollie kind of preached down the stretch of saying, look, it's developmental. Sure, we want to get some of these young guys in there, but we're still going to prioritize the win each and every day because we want guys to know how that feels so that when these games are for pennant races and not just in meaningless baseball in September for the standings, they'll have that gear to say, hey, let's go be killers. Let's have the killer instinct to win. Let's know what that feels like. Let's instill that in guys. That you could have guys in your minor leagues contributing to wins and contributing to just the organization in the way that a guy like Moises Gomez did. And don't hear what I'm not saying. It doesn't functionally matter if Moises Gomez ever turns into anything. To waste all the time and spend all the time to bother to sign him to a contract, bring him in, have him be so good in Double-A, to promote him to Triple-A and have him be as good as he was and never find a chance for him, what are you doing? It's just a waste of time and energy if you're never trying to see what a guy is made of, right? Richie Palacios, they end up doing that with him, and maybe they hit on something. But to me, the Moises Gomez thing is going to be one of those that even if the Cardinals are right and he's nothing, and clearly they think he's nothing if they have brought him up, right? There's just no justifiable reason not to bring him up with all the guys that they had, random dudes in September that were playing for this team. Clearly they think he's nothing. He might be, but it functionally doesn't matter. It's the process that's a problem for the St. Louis Cardinals. The decision-making process is the same process that led to a Rosarena, that led to Adolis Garcia. And I understand every team in baseball passed on Adolis Garcia, but it's the Cardinals that did it twice because it was a Rosarena, it was Adolis Garcia, and those are the two big ones that I think come out because they're two outfielders that were in the organization at the same time, and still 5 years on, they're trying to figure out their damn outfield. To me, that is a signal of a process problem with the decision-making. It doesn't mean they can't fix the outfield this year. It doesn't mean they won't have a great outfield in 2024 and pick all the right players to play. But I think it is a process problem that you can have Moises Gomez do what he did in 2022, never find a way to give him a chance, but still keep him in the organization until what? He turns 30 and then you move on? Like, I don't know. He's 20, 25, 26 years old at this point, I believe, for Moises Gomez. Not 26. He just turned 25. So we'll see. He's still got some youth to him. Again, I'm not saying he's a good defensive outfielder, and I know at times the Cardinals were prioritizing different things, but in a situation like that, it's just wild to me. He may fade into the distance and not do anything. His numbers in the Winter League weren't good, or aren't good. I guess I don't know if that's still ongoing, 23, 24, so I don't know if that's still ongoing. But he's got like a 190 average with a 650 OPS in the Winter League, which is kind of similar to the VEWL is what I'm looking at on Baseball Reference, Venezuelan Winter League. That's about similar to what his numbers were in that league last offseason. Then it looks like he went to the Puerto Rican Winter League and had a much better showing, 1,000 OPS, which maybe that's a weaker competition in terms of the quality of the league. But nevertheless, like if I'm Moises Gomez, again, I think it's possible to have your confidence sapped. Eventually, you want to be the organization instilling confidence in people because it doesn't make you look cool to hold a guy back and then he's able to thrive despite your holding him back. Wouldn't it look cool to instill confidence in a guy and build somebody up and turn him into something rather than somebody make a career of themselves in spite of the way that you handled them? And again, we've beaten it to death when it comes to the Arozarena and the Adolis Garcia thing. But I do think it's a process problem with this organization, and we'll see if they learn from it at any point. But in the case of, and we're talking about Ian Bedell, the reason I bring this up is because I'm looking at the 40-man. Ian Bedell, again, has only ever done the things that you think he should do to be successful. Do the Cardinals not bring him up to Double-A because they're hoping to slip him by and know that they don't want to add him to the 40-man yet, and they're hoping that teams don't pick up on that? I don't know, but if that was their strategy, it was a dumb one. And again, process over result. I'm saying that before knowing the result of whether he's drafted or not, because I can look at his numbers and look at his stuff and look at his journey and say, I'm an MLB team. I take a flyer on that guy to put in my bullpen because I just got to have him throw 50 innings or something in my bullpen this year, low leverage, and then I have him for the rest of his career, and I maybe do turn him into a AAA starter who can maybe advance to the big leagues beyond that. Maybe he shows me something. Maybe he's just a guy who's got 3 years of college experience, 1 pro season, and that's been enough, and he's going to perform. He's going to thrive when we throw him into the fire in the big league bullpen. Like, that is a possibility for Ian Bedell, and I could say that before knowing the result, knowing the outcome. Sometimes it's silly to get mad about stuff. I'm not mad about it. I'm going to see what the Cardinals end up doing, what ends up happening with the Rule 5. But when I look at this 40-man roster, and I know the Cardinals need pitching, that's their whole thing, like, to me, it's a strategic mistake to not just put him on the 40-man. Because James Nail can go off it, and you could add him later if you need to. Guys will be injured in spring. They'll be on the 60-man. It'll be good to go. Jake Woodford, if Jake Woodford gets non-tendered on Friday, which maybe this is a sign that he won't, I don't know. I know the deadline for those is Friday. It kind of feels like it's backwards. You'd like to have the non-tender deadline first, clear up some spots, and then know who you want to protect. But it kind of feels, from Rule 5, kind of feels like it goes in the opposite direction. But nothing would keep the Cardinals from saying, yeah, if we're not going to move forward with Jake Woodford, let's do that by Tuesday instead of Friday. We'll see. Jake Woodford, I think, could be a depth piece for the organization. But as we talked about yesterday, $1.1 million or so is what he's going to make. Do you need to have that guaranteed money out there for a guy that, at this point, I feel like you have an idea of what he is because he has gotten opportunities and hasn't performed super well with them. It's not the same as a guy who's never gotten an opportunity to know what he's made of. This guy has. So that would be the case with him. Guillermo Zuniga, we'll see if he ends up turning into anything, but obviously had an injury-riddled season last year and didn't really do much. So, and the Cardinals, again, didn't seem to have him very high on their wish list. When there were chances to have him in the big league bullpen, they kept sending him back down while other guys weren't performing. So there's another example of a player you could look at. On the position player side, I think they're pretty well loaded. Is Luken Baker someone that you really want to make sure you have long-term? We like Luken Baker, but is he going to pass through waivers? Maybe. Maybe the Cardinals don't want to have that happen. Jose Fermin, I'm just going to be honest with you, doesn't bring much offensively. Good dude, but am I sure that he's the future that they need in the middle infield? Maybe they feel like they need him for backup shortstop duties in case Edman is pulled full-time to center field. Okay, but you've got Mason Wynn. You've got, other guys that you made out the decision to sign Buddy Kennedy and Jared Young. So if we're going to treat all of these minor decisions and these additions with, it doesn't really matter, it's just the bottom of the 40-man, okay, we could have that attitude, and I'm okay with an organization feeling that way and just saying, don't freak out. It's the last guys on the 40-man. It's not a big deal. If that's the case, you cannot also then turn around and say, well, the 40-man was full. We really just didn't have room for Ian Bedell. We thought he might get picked, but, we just didn't have room. You cannot have that both ways. So will Ian Bedell get selected? I don't know. I kind of half hope he does because I think it would be fascinating to see what he could do. The Cardinals held him in high A all season long, and I'm going to be interested to see if a team takes a flyer on him. He feels like, yes, normally you're doing that with guys that are in Double-A, Triple-A, not high A, but his specific situation with the injury and the experienced college career before that could tell me that a team could maybe take that plunge. What do you think, Cardinals fans? Are you worried about the Ian Bedell thing? It's, again, he's a prospect. It's not like he's one of the top prospects. But again, I think there was room to keep him if you wanted to do so. And if the Cardinals are simply anticipating that they're going to have to cut all these other guys when they make the moves that they make to add free agent pitchers and things like that, then okay. But I think you can make those decisions at that point and try to anticipate the Ian Bedell situation and not allow him to be unprotected for the Rule 5 draft. The benefit of it is, obviously, I should talk about both sides. The benefit is if he doesn't get selected, you're safe and you don't have to waste a roster spot on a guy that you don't think is going to contribute in 2024 at the big league level. Like, he'll start the season at AA. If he pitches well, he'll move to AAA, but I don't think seeing him ascend to the big leagues is particularly likely. There's a lot of prospects he would have to hop over in order to make that happen. So that's part of the reason that they don't do it. They have their reasons, but I do feel like it's worth exploring all sides of an issue like that when you have the fodder that you have on the 40-man. Again, we like Juan Yepez. Have the Cardinals done anything in the past calendar year to make you think that they think Juan Yepez is a part of their future? I would say no. You've got these guys who are, quad A. They bounce back and forth between AAA and the big leagues. You've got Yepez that is in that category. You've got Jared Young, who was in that category for another team, and now maybe he's set to be that for your team. Buddy Kennedy, same thing. Jose Fermin, same thing. Luken Baker, same thing. You've got 5 or 6 position players that are like that. Do any of them feel like guys that are part of your future? They'll have to make those decisions. But I think on the pitching side, we named some of the guys that are in that category as well. The Cardinals have got to make these tough decisions. I think for the sake of Cardinals fans, hopefully their process is a sound one in the way they go about them this offseason. But let me know what you think there, Cardinals fans. Are you worried about Ian Bedell? Do you not care about the idea that a high A pitcher could be headed to another organization? Do you think, nobody will take him from high A, so it's much ado about nothing? Don't worry about it. Let me know what you think about the state of the 40-man roster, Cardinals fans, in the comments below right here on YouTube. And make sure you are subscribed on YouTube, youtube.com/@bschaeffer12. Click that subscribe button. Please click like on this video and drop your comments below. If you like listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, thank you for joining us over there as well. Make sure you subscribe to those apps with the Be Schaef Daily podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening, as always, and we'll talk to you next time on Be Schaef Daily. Peace.